Stumbled into the Badishbaugh Family Variety Hour, and I hope that our charm and talent make up for the fact that we didn't have time to make anything for the potluck. It's been a big week for loving thy neighbor. This past week's progress and turmoil, combined with our recent reflections on the texts about the biblical character of Jezebel, made it very tempting to get up here and give you a fiery breakdown of the first inklings of what I'm pretty sure are a much-needed revolution. But I didn't want Jerry to come back next week to an empty church, so I will spare you today. Instead, I'm going to tell you that writing about these passages was tough, just like last time, and I'm starting to get the impression that the Bible is kind of complicated. Take the passages from today, from Galatians and Luke. On their surface, they seem antithetical to each other. Paul, in Galatians, implores us not to submit to a yoke of slavery. But then in Luke, Jesus himself lays down a withering smackdown on those men who don't fit his very narrow parameters of discipleship. It's a frustrating contradiction. And at the heart of it, in fact, if you look at it from a certain perspective, at the heart of all of Christianity, is a concept and a word that I cannot abide. And that word is obedience. My dad is here, and he can attest that I was born disobedient. I practically came out of the womb ready to raise hell, and it hasn't really changed. I don't mind some fruits of the Spirit, but I am bonkers for works of the flesh. When you were accepting me into this congregation as a member last year, there came a time in that ceremony when Jerry asked me if I renounced all evil, and I really had to think about it. Obedience to me is a four-letter word, and unlike literally all the others, it's one that I don't enjoy saying. Jerry has expounded very fondly on the subject of obedience from this pulpit, and all I've been able to do is sit in the back pew, snapping my bubblegum and rolling my eyes. And when Jesus tells me to my face that I'm going to be denied the keys of the kingdom if I want to bury my own father before I go with him, I'm inclined to disagree. Every day, we put up with hassles and harassments. We have employers and loved ones telling us we're not good enough, and advertisers and politicians obsessively laying out the criteria we need to fit in order to be taken seriously. And I think that it's only fair that we should have one place that we can go a few hours a week where we can meditate in the embrace of a positive force. But these passages want to tell us that the love of God is not unconditional, that we have to leave our lives and livelihoods and memories behind if we want to move forward in the company of our mentor, Jesus, presumably, or that we have to abstain from virtually everything that makes life worthwhile. All those things that my dad listed, they're great. And most appallingly, they insist that we have to love our neighbor. That is, Paul says, the whole law. And that line from that passage calls to mind, for me, a quote from alchemist and occultist Aleister Crowley, who directly contradicts Paul when he says, "Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." And for anyone who has ever been abused, for anyone who has ever been relentlessly bullied and told that they're incapable, for anyone who's ever had to be obedient, that is a much more appealing concept than loving your neighbor. To an outsider, these passages from Galatians and Luke make it sound like free will is almost non-existent in Christianity. There's so many strings attached. And for anyone who's ever been in an oppressive situation, absolute freedom is always going to win out over more rules. So until I took the time to sort of converse with these passages and to let them know all of my problems with them and to hear their rebuttals back to me, I made no distinction between the concepts of obedience and subservience. I've made space for nuances in my definitions now. After all, the social contract, that unwritten set of rules that keeps us from murdering each other every day, is upheld by our obedience to each other. And in that way, obedience can be love. Through love, become slaves to one another. In our very first meeting to discuss becoming an open and affirming church, those of you who were there will remember that Jerry threw out some pretty extreme situations to test our love for our prospective neighbors. What if a homeless person came to worship with us, he asked, or a sex offender? What he never addressed in those questions was how to deal with people who you just don't like. They don't have to be extreme. They don't have to be people who you hate. They don't even have to be people who you know. There are people we meet every day whose personalities are incompatible with ours, or people whose quirks are so off-putting that you just have to outright avoid them. Everyone in this room, I can guarantee you right now, could list off at least 5 people who they just don't like. But do you love them? And do you ever have to tell them that? And what about people who have been really cruel to you? Paul acknowledges that we're prone or even eager to bite and devour each other. He allows for us to dislike each other, because how could he not? But he's open to the very plausible idea that your neighbor might have brought harm to you. He might be trying to burn your house down to make more room for his cattle. And by doing this, Paul gives us space to love from a distance. And that is the conclusion that I've come to about this passage. The slavery of love doesn't require us to be obsequious to each other. We don't even have to speak to one another. We're allowed to live peacefully with that love, even if our neighbors have troubled our lives. Paul allows us to forgive without demanding an apology, and he lets us apologize without groveling. Love your neighbors. Love all people, even to the point of obedience. But don't let them grind you down. Amen.